Hey, fellow real estate investors, are you looking for an easy way to extract property information from Zillow? In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to get information from Zillow like property data, Zestimate, rent estimate, and more by using Python. My name is Ariel Herrera, your fellow data scientist with the AnalyticsAriel channel, where we bridge the gap between real estate and technology. I love using data to drive business decisions, and if you do too, please be sure to subscribe to my channel to get the latest content in tech and real estate. As well, like this content if you want to see more of data tutorials. All right, let's get started. Right now I'm on Zillow's page and I searched in one of the cities that I'm interested in, which is Brandon, Florida. And within Zillow, I'm able to get a list of properties that are currently for sale. If I go to the right-hand panel, I get some really interesting information that expands a little bit more on the property, such as bedrooms, bathrooms, Zestimate, which is pretty huge, and things like description and more. Now, this is useful when looking at a property one by one. However, if you want to get information on multiple properties at once, it's really not useful to use the Zillow interface. There are some alternatives like using web scraping tools. However, what's really useful is that there's companies that have already done web scraping on Zillow information and make that data available through an API. So let's jump right into the API itself. But first, where this API is hosted is rapidapi.com on Hub. Think of Rapid API as a marketplace that basically allows developers to put code available that you're able to extract different types of data. So for example, on their homepage, you could get information like flight data, SMS, translation, city data, and more. But for our use case, we're going to look at the Zillow data. Now, this is not provided by Zillow themselves. It is the third party that has already scraped Zillow's information and made it available super easy in this API. So right now we're on the Zillow.com API, which is created by API Maker. Notice this does not say AnalyticsAriel, so if you have any discrepancies, please reach out directly to the creators of this API. And also note that there is a pricing structure for it. So what's really neat is just for testing this data, you can have 20 queries or requests, which we'll go over that, don't worry, and pay nothing. However, you do have to make sure you subscribe to at least this part. It will ask you for a credit card, but don't worry, it's not going to charge you unless you go over, which you can also monitor pretty easily. Now, if you have lots of real estate data that you want to be able to extract monthly, you could always go to a pro membership, $30 a month for 9,000 requests, which is really, really generous. So let's now actually dive into this data. What you're going to see on the left-hand side is endpoints, and that basically is, think of it as directories of where data sits. So we have property details where you can get really niche information on a property like description as well as Zestimate. Then we have extended search, which we're going to focus on first. So we're going to click that. And what's really cool here is on the right-hand side, we see example responses. And in the example responses, we could see that information that we're going to get back for whatever city we put, we're going to get information like bathrooms, property type, latitude, price, ZPID, and more. So how we're going to start this is making sure that we actually have subscription to the endpoint. So if you see test endpoint like I do, make sure that you actually click this and then you subscribe to this endpoint itself. And then you're going to be able to actually query it within Python. So let's jump into a Python notebook. This is publicly available, so feel free to click the link within the show notes and copy this into your own folder. I chose to do it in Google Colab because you don't need to have Python installed on your local machine. You can literally do everything just from here, which is pretty neat. So the first thing we want to care about is actually importing some libraries. Google Colab, if you want to store information like your keys or other things that are private, I highly suggest to do so and use Google Colab Drive and Files to have that. Not necessary though. Then you need to have pandas, which is going to allow us to manipulate data, requests to actually get the data, and then we'll go on to these packages as well. So going down to locals and constants, what I'm doing here is I'm basically saying this is where my drive is, this is where it sits for Google Colab, and this is my directory of where you're going to later pull my Rapid API key, which again is optional. And then what we need to have is a city and state in mind that we want to get data for. So in this case, I want to get data for Brandon, Florida, the same exact city that I have over here. I want to be able to extract information from here programmatically. So here I'm going to type in Brandon and then Florida. Now we'll make sure we want to run everything so far. So we could go to runtime at the top and click run before. It's going to run all the previous cells, which we see a check mark here. It ran the cell. Now we can run this by either clicking the play button or hitting Shift Enter. And now we could see that we have our drive mounted and our search string is Brandon, Florida. Now the way you're going to get your API key is super simple. Is over here when we go back to the Zillow API, within here, Rapid API key, it's going to say what your API key is. And you're going to copy this information. It's also going to show up over here as well. Now what I have is I have this separate in its own file. So I'm going to just run this. And I basically have a string that allows me to extract data from Rapid API endpoints. Now the first endpoint we want to get is data that's for sale. What's actually for sale in Brandon? How do we extract that? Now tabbing back here, if we go to Python, so we're going to scroll down here, hit request, we can actually copy this information. It's basically sample code that's going to allow us to get the data. So I'm going to paste that in here, and we have our URL, which is property extended search. That's the endpoint we're hitting. Now location, that's not really what I want. I want to be able to get Brandon, Florida. But up here, as we see, we created our search string variable, which joins city and state. So I could just copy this and paste it over here. Then for our Rapid API key, it says undefined. Yours might already say the key right there. I'm going to take my variable and bring this in. And right now we can run this as is, and it's going to give us a response back for properties that are for sale, which we see that down here. However, I don't want to see everything for sale, right? Maybe I have a certain criteria of things that I want to look at. So in order to actually filter on that, we're going to go back to the documentation, and we have a required parameter, which was the location, but now we have optional parameters as well. So I want to keep it the same in that the house type I'm looking for is single family, so I'm going to keep it as houses. However, if I go more down, there's information like min price, max price, of filters that we could put so we're not just getting a dump of everything. So I'm going to copy min price and bring it over here. Separate this out, add a comma. This is a dictionary which allows us to have key value pairs. And here I'm going to put minimum price, and my minimum price that I'm looking for in my area is $150,000. Next, I want to also set a maximum price. So if we go here, we could see max price is an option. I'm going to copy this over and paste it here. My max price is going to be $300,000. I want to see what other options there are. We could set the rent minimum price, maximum price, beds and baths. Now, I'm interested to possibly add value into a property, so I'm not that concerned if, say, it's only a 2-bedroom right now. If the square feet is at least 1,300, then I know that I can add an extra bedroom. So I'm going to actually filter on square footage. I'm going to get my response back, but let me actually change this a little bit so it's more specific to what we're getting data for. So we're getting data for sale from Zillow. So I'm going to change this variable name. And now I want to transform this into a JSON response so that it's a little bit easier for us to digest. I want to call this the same variable, but just add JSON to the end of it. Now we can see that we have information on all the addresses including information like bathrooms, bedrooms, and more. However, this is not really friendly to look at, so let's actually transform this into a data frame, which is basically a table with rows and columns. So we could see that all the addresses are nested into this props part. So what we're going to do is actually use that in order to get our data together. So we're going to use pandas and then normalize our JSON file. And then for our data, it's going to come from that Zillow for sale response. And then we know that the addresses are in that props key. So now if we run this, we're going to get all of our information back, which is now in a really nice format of columns and rows. So I'm going to add a little bit more context here for us to actually understand how many columns and rows we have. So what I did here is that I named this a data frame, so data frame Z for sale, and I'm going to print out the number of rows and columns, and I'm only returning the head, which is the first 5 rows. So we could see here that we have 9 rows in total. I'm only showing the first 5, and we have 18 columns. Information we have includes the type of property it is, which they should all be single family, the price, ZPID, which will be very important later on, latitude and longitude, currency, and some more. But this is still limited. Like, I want things like description, Zestimate, rent estimate, things that have more importance to the property itself. So now if we go back to the Zillow API, if we look at the first endpoint, which is property details, and we look at example responses, we could see that there's a load of information. We get information like how long the property was on Zillow, the Zestimate. There's going to be stuff like the description, just what we want. Now we could see that the parameters that is needed is ZPID. ZPID is a unique ID that Zillow gives to each property. It is not the MLS ID, it's completely separate and only for Zillow. So now how do we actually get this information? We could see that when we got the properties for sale, that ZPID was one of those columns. So what we need to do is to be able to run each of these ZPIDs through this API, this endpoint, to get the property detail. So let's do that right now. So we're going to get our data frame here, and then we're going to call the column name, which is ZPID, and we're going to bring that to a list. And we can see all of our ZPIDs there. We're going to give this a variable name of ZPID. Now the next step is that we actually want to iterate, which means going by each and every one of these ZPIDs and getting the property detail. So let's go back to this API. And if we go to code snippets, we're at Python request. We can copy this and bring it back over here. We can remove this import since we already imported it above. And we can replace the Rapid API key with our own Rapid API key. Now, this is going to get information for one single property. However, we want it to be for multiple properties. So what we're going to do is actually set this up to create just a blank list so that we can actually append new JSON files to it, which I'll explain in a bit. So let's first create that. Next, we want to iterate through each of these ZPIDs. We basically want to input the ZPID into this query string, so we're going to replace that here. So now it's dynamic. We're going to tab, and then going to add a little bit of commentary here. I'm going to change this response to something that's a little bit more descriptive. So what we're getting right now is the Zillow property detail. Once we get that property information, we also want to transfer it into a JSON file type. Now what's really important to note here is that as we go through this, it's basically going to go and say, hey, what are all the ZPIDs in this list? For each one of these, I'm going to go and get the data from this request right here, from this endpoint, and then I'm going to transform it to a JSON file. Now, Python's very, very fast, so it's going to do things very rapidly. But if we go back to pricing here, we see that the rate limit, so how many times can you hit an API within a given amount of time, is 1 request per second. So it is not going to allow us to rapidly fire and get this information. We have to wait at least 1 second. So what we're going to do here is add a wait to have our program basically sleep and wait until a certain amount of time to continue. So I'm using the package time in order to do that, and I'm sleeping for 1.5 minutes just in case 1 second isn't enough. And once it sleeps, I want to have this new data appended to that empty list that we had beforehand. Great, so now we actually have a loop that we're going to do for each of the ZPIDs. We're going to get detail for the property, and now we can run this by either clicking the run on top or shift enter. As we see here, it's a little bit slower to run because what it's doing is it's stopping for 1.5 seconds for each of these properties, which in total there is 9. So it should take a little over 15 seconds or so. And now that is done. We could see the check mark. It had to take exactly 15 seconds. And what we're going to do is transform this again into a table that's easy for us to digest. So we're going to enter pandas and then JSON normalize and bring in our list of property detail and set this to a data frame. Now, if we view it here, we have all 9 properties and we have a ton of columns, which we'll detail in a second. But first, let's just get a little bit more information on what this data looks like. So we could see we have 9 rows in total, which I'm stopping at only showing the first 2. And we have 205 columns. Like, that's a lot of information. That's amazing. However, it's a lot to sift through. I highly encourage you to actually go through each of these columns and understand if there's information that you want from it. However, just from me knowing and gone through this data, there's some key data points here that we should have. So I have this column called detail columns, of columns that I want to be able to bring back so that I can export them into a CSV file. So for example, I want to be able to bring street address back, and street address is over here. So what I'm going to do is now specify what I want to retain. So what I just did here is that I said for my data frame that I had on top that had 205 columns, just take the ones that are from this list that I specified called detailed columns and set that as the output that I want to be able to get. And from what we could see here, it's now reduced and in the same exact order that I specified up top. So we have street address, city, time on Zillow, Zestimate, rent Zestimate, description, price history, and more. Now, if we want to download this file into Excel, we could do that as well. It's pretty easy. I'm taking my data frame and I'm converting it to CSV, and I'm naming it just the same as a data frame. You can name it anything you'd like. And then with files download, which is by Google Colab, I'm able to actually download this file. So if we run that now, we could see that pop through. And now we could see that we have our Excel file that has all the information now within an easy way for us to now start manipulating the data. This is so useful, but there's so much more we can do with this on adding metrics, actually automating some of this part using Zapier. So if you actually want more detailed knowledge of using Zillow data and working with it as an investor or appraiser, or even a real estate agent, then please sign up for my course. It's going to be called Real Estate Property Data Course. And if you sign up before the course is released this fall, you'll receive free access. As well, if you are already a student of one of my other courses, you will also receive free access too. What if you don't want just all for sale properties? Maybe you have already a list of addresses that you want to get data from. Well, in the next video, I'm going to show you how we can actually get data for any single address, which may be really useful depending on your use case. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.